Daf Kuf Tes Vav Amud Aleph Perek Kol Kisvei. Dr. Mishnah Kol Kisvei Kodesh Matzil and Oisam Ibnei Adleika. The Mishnah says that Kisvei Kodesh, Torah Nevim Ksuvim, can be saved from Rachmana Litzlan of fire. In general terms, the Chachamim impose restrictions on what can be saved from a fire. There is a concern that a person, he's bol al mamoina, and he might be preoccupied with trying to save what he can from the fire, and he might come to put out the fire. So therefore, as we'll see in the coming bludgeon and the perek, that there are restrictions of what can be saved, how many things can be saved. But Kisvei Kodesh, they relax that restriction. For the covet of the Kisvei Kodesh, then they did not impose that restriction. They also permitted things to be carried in an area where normally it'd be awesome rabbanan to carry. Now, they certainly weren't matir carrying in Rishus Harabim, which is deraisa, but in a movoi, which is a movoi which is not mafulish, or a chotzer, where these areas require eruv chatzer, shitef muvuos, and without that it's normally also to carry midrabanan. They were matir for the sake of the Kisvei Kodesh to carry in these areas. Tosfos says that in general the restriction on saving from a fire, Rachmana Litzlan, is because Adam bol mamoina, he might come to put out the fire. He says, therefore, Tosfos, it's only if a person is saving from a fire from his house, in his chotzer. But if it's in another house, another chotzer, where it's not his, Tosfos says, therefore, it would be mutter, you don't have that issue. So the Mishnah says that Kol Kisvei Kodesh Matzil and Oisam Ibnei Adleika, Bein She'karim Behem, and Bein She'ein Karim Behem. Whether we read from them, or whether we don't. So as Rashi explains, and we'll see from the Gemara, that the Gemara says this beferish, that Kairim and Ein Kairim is Neviim, Ein Kairim Ksuvim. That the Ksuvim are considered things that we don't read from them. Why is that? So Rashi gives two pshatim. One pshat, he says, is because that there's no Hofstedter from the Ksuvim. The Hofstedters are from Nevi'im, so generally we don't lane from the Ksuvim on Shabbos. So that's one area which wouldn't indicate necessarily an Isser. It's just practically we don't lane from them, so it's not that needed. That's why it's called Ein Karim. And it brings another pshat for Rabbeinu Levi that it's also to lane from Ksuvim, at least in those days, because in those days they used to give drashas to the masses that were busy and with their work during the whole week, and they wanted to ensure that they came to the drasha on Shabbos, and when the Shabbos drasha they would tell them over halachas and things that they had to know, and they wanted to ensure that they came to the drasha. Ksuvim are things that people learn from them, that will get carried away from them and what they're very interested in, and they perhaps would learn from the Ksuvim at the expense of the shir and not come to the shir. So they wanted to make sure that they came to the drasha, which would instruct them in the hanhaga, the conduct, and the halachas that they had to keep. So they also learning from Ksuvim in those days. However, because of the covet of Kisvei Kodesh, whether they're Karim or Ein Karim, Ksuvim also can be saved from Rachmana Litzlan of fire. So Mishnah says, "Kol Kisvei Kodesh Matzil Reis B'nei like a Bein She'karim Behem, Bein She'ein Karim Behem, whether Nevi'im or Ksuvim, V'afal Pi She'Ksuvim B'chol Lashon, even if they're written in other languages." And there's a man Damar who says, as we'll see in the Gemara, that it's also to write them in other languages. Nevertheless, they still can be saved from the fire. And soon in Geniza, and they have to be buried if it's not on Shabbos. Meaning, in any event, these Kisvei Kodesh, you have to treat them with kavod, and irrespective of the fire, but they can't be left out in a place of bizayon. They have to be tun geniza, have to be buried if they are not being used or cannot be used. They have to be buried. And why do we say we don't lane for them? Because bittul beis hamedrash, that because of the, like was explained, because of the drosha, that they have to come to the drosha, bittul beis hamedrash. So there's somewhat of a difficulty in Rashi's first pshat. The Mishnah seems to be saying very clearly that Ein Karim Behem is built to Medrash. Why is Rashi saying that Ein Karim Behem is Nevi'im, and Karim Behem rather is Nevi'im, where they have the Haftarah from the Nevi'im? Ein Karim Behem is Ksuvim, where there's no Haftarah. The Mishnah says clearly that Ein Karim is Bittul Beis HaMedrash, which seemed to be clearly the Tam of Rabbeinu Levi. So Meforshim speak out in Rashi that meaning part of the reason why they answer the Ksuvim for Bittul Beis HaMedrash is because we don't have Haftarah from Ksuvim, and therefore we don't need the Ksuvim for the Haftarah, and we want the people to come to the drasha, therefore they answered it. But if there would be laning and Haftarah from Ksuvim, they wouldn't have answered it. So it's part and parcel of the same reasoning. If the Kisvei Kodesh, the Ksuvim, were written in Targum or a different Lashon, Rav Huna Amar ein matzilon naisim bnei hadleika. You don't save it from the lake. So whether the Kisvei Kodesh, but there's Ksuvim, Rashi says, second shot, it's going on all Kisvei Kodesh, whether if it's written in a different language, in Targum or in any other language, then Rav Huna says there you're not matzil bnei hadleika. We did not allow you to save it from the fire. Rav Chisda Amar matzil nais bnei hadleika, but Rav Chisda says you are matzil bnei hadleika. So Zog Tigmar, leave it the Mandomer nitl likris behem. According to the Mandomer, that says that it's mutter to learn from these types of forms that are written in other languages. Kulei alma, like plig the matzila. Everyone is minded that you can be matzil. Keep pliga, leave it the Mandomer like nitl likris behem. But the machlekes is, according to the Mandomer, it says they cannot be translated. That they must be in Lashon Kodesh. The only translation that they have, according to this Mandomer, was Greek. But otherwise, it's also so. I'll leave the Mandomar that loy nitnu likres. That's where we have the machlekes. Rav Huna Amar ein matzilin dahal loy nitnu likres. Rav Huna says you can't save it because it's also to learn from them. It's also to learn from them. So we weren't matir these types of form. Rav Chisda matzilin. He said. Rav Chisda says no. Nevertheless, it's mutter to be matzil mishum bizayin kisvei kodesh, because nevertheless they're kisvei kodesh, and it's a bizayin to have them burnt up on Huslan in the fire. So we see a machlekes, and we see a machlekes whether Sforim can be translated. Now we know nowadays we see it's commonplace that Sforim are translated regularly. So and that is because of Eis Lasses Lashem Efer Torah Secha, that just like Torah Shabbal Peh originally was not meant to be written down, it's written down because Eis Lasses Lashem Efer Torah Secha, because people couldn't manage without it. So too, in later years, in later generations, people could not manage without translations. So therefore, Taisa says nowadays this is not relevant to Lamais, not relevant. Discussion is not relevant la'alocha, because nowadays that our Sfarim we save them because it's nitnu likris b'hem b'kuli alma, because Eis Lasses Lashem Efer Torah Secha. There's, however, a discussion in the Rishonim that to what extent do we say Eis Lasses Lashem? Does that mean that all translations are mutter in any language, in any way? The Ran says that the translations are only mutter if they're needed. To translate into a language that is not going to be used, to some foreign language that's rarely used, that there's not a tzibur of Yidden or Hashem Torah mitzvahs, it's not coming to use. To translate in that manner is also. It's also only because it's mutter, rather only for the purpose of the tzibur who need it. But if it's not going to be used, just to have it translated for the record, that would be awesome. We have machlekes over here, Rav Huna and Rav Chisda. Now, according to the Mandomar, that says that you're allowed to learn from these translated Sforim. You certainly can say them. But according to the Mandomer, it says you can't. There we have the machlekes. Rav Huna says, well, Lamaisa, it's also to learn from these forums, so therefore you can't say them. Rav Chisda says, no, it's still mutar because of Bizayin Kisvei Kodesh. Tanan, we learned in the Mishnah called Kisvei Kodesh Matzil, and Oisam Ipnei Adleika, Ben Shekaren Bem, Ben Shein Karen Bem, V'afal Pi Sheksum B'chol Losh. So what does the Mishnah mean? My love Shekaren Bem Neviim. Doesn't it mean those that are mutar are Neviim? And we lay them, they have the Haftarah from the Nevi'im, Ushein Kohen Bem, are Ksuvim. And Afal Pisha Ksum B'chol the Lein Likros Bem, even though they're written in other languages, meaning, and therefore they're translated, and it's also to learn from them, nevertheless, Uktanim Matzilan, that they can be saved from the fire. Utiyaf to Rav Huna, and so it's in the Sakashan Rav Huna, Amar Lach Rav Huna, V'tizbra. Is that the way, the right translation, the right pshat in the Mishnah? Ema Sefer, the Sefer says Sinu and Geniza. It says they can be saved. Well, Hashda Atzulim Atzilin, and you tell me you can save it from a fire on Shabbos. Atzulim Atzilinan, Geniza mi boy. Do you have to tell me? Does the Mishnah have to tell me that you don't leave it lying around and they are buried at Tun Geniza, and during the week they have to be buried? So that can't be the pshat in the Mishnah. Elo, what's the pshat in the Mishnah? Rav Huna Metaris L'Tamei, Rav Chisda Metaris L'Tamei. Rav Huna Metaris L'Tamei, Bein Shekarim Behem. What is that referring to? Nevi'im. Ubein Shein Karim Behem, it's Ksuvim. B'amed, Dvarim Amor Mishuzim B'Lashon HaKodesh. When it says, this is what's chosr. B'amed, Dvarim when they're written Lashon HaKodesh, where it's mutter to relate from. Aval B'chol Lashon, if it's in a different language, Ein Matzil. So this is Rav Huna L'Tamei, if it's written in a language, Ein Matzil. So the Matzilin is only if it's Lashon HaKodesh. But it's B'chol Lashon, Ein Matzil. V'afilo hachi, but nevertheless, even though you can't save them from a fire on Shabbos, afilo hachi, Geniza bo, they still need Geniza. They can't be saved from a fire on Shabbos, but they need Geniza, need to be buried away. That's the way Rav Huna will interpret. Rav Chisda Metaris L'Tamei as follows: Bein Shekarim Behem Nevi'im, Ubein Shein Karim Behem Ksuvim. Afal Pi Sheksum B'chol Lashon Nami Matzil. Even though in other languages, and it's also Likros, but Nami Matzil, you can say them. But what it means to say is, when it says Tun Geniza, it means if it's worn out. If you have the worn out Svarim that you can't lane for them because they're all worn away, the makak has to be buried. Meisel Askikash on Rav Huna Hayuksuvim Targum. The Brisa says if it was written in Targum, so it says clearly that if it's written in other languages, you could save them from the fire. Tiyufta Rav Huna is a kash on Rav Huna. Amar Lach Rav Huna. Haitana Sava Nitnu Likros Bem. No, he says not a kasha because this Tana, where it says they're written in other languages, holds that it's mutter to lane from these type of sforim that are translated. So that's why you can save them. So it's not a kasha. I'll ask you from the following: Giftis, Modis, Iris, Ilmis, Yavonis. It was translated into any of these languages, these different languages. Alpha Pisha Loinit, no Likros Bem. It says clearly, even though it's Loinit, Likros, it's also the lane for the Matzil, and I some Nead Lake Tiyufta Rav Huna. It's a clear Tiyufta Rav Huna. Amalach Rav Huna Tanoi. He says, Enochanami. You see from here that even though it's loinit or likres, and you can save them, but it's a machlekes tanoim. This Tana holds that way, but I'm going according to a different Tana. The Tana we learned the Brisa, Yiksuvim Targum B'chol Lashon. If it was translated Matzil and Oisim Nead Leika, you can save them from the lake. Rav Yasi Aimer Ein Matzil and Oisim Nead Leika. Rav Yasi says you cannot. That it's also that if it's translated you cannot. Rav Yasi Ma'aseh Baba Chalafta Shalachetzel Rukavamil Beribila Tveria. Rav Yasi says there's a Ma'aseh with Abba Chalafta, his father Chalafta. The Meforshim question, how could he call his father by his name? His father Chalafta. Rabbi Akiva Eiger says if he uses the title Abba, so with that he's giving kavod. Abba Chalafta. So just to call his father by his name would be also. But he calls him Abba Chalafta, it's mutter. So he says in Ma'aser Dabach Halav Teshalach Etzel Rav Gamliel Ribi Rav Gamliel the Gadol Ador L'Tveria Umatzal Sheyoishev Al Shulchan Shal Yochanan Nazav B'Yad Sefer Iyai Targum V'Ukay Rabbi, and there was a Sefer Targum, and he was learning from it. And even though it's translated Omer Loi, he says, Zochani Rabbi Gamliel Avi Avicha. I remember by Rabbi Gamliel Hazak and your grandfather, Shaya Omer Al Gabi Mala B'Harabayis. He was by the steps of the Harabayis. V'Avir Lefanav Sefer Iyai Targum, and they brought to him a Sefer Iyai that was translated Targum. V'Omer Lebenoi, and he told the builder that was there, Shoko Tachas Nidvach, bury it under a pile of stones. And therefore, upon hearing that, he also commanded them to hide and bury this sefer. That it's also to learn from it, so it needs geniza. Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Yehuda, he had a different version of the Maisa. He said, that they poured on it the trough of tid of clay. Omer Rebbe says, there's two kashas on this version of the Maisa. They didn't have tit and harabais. They didn't build with clay. They built with sand and limestone. Make it plaster. That's how they built. And additionally, even though we say it's also likreis boy, but you can't be ma'avid biyad to destroy it, actively destroy it. You leave it in an exposed area. On its own, it decays. So therefore, we want to see proof from here that it's a machlokes tanoim, and Rav Huna was going a little bit to the man domer that says if it's also likreis, ein matzilin. So practically more man tanoi. Who are the machlokes tanoim that we're referring to? Ilema Tanakama, the Rav Yossi. If it's the Tanakama of this Bryce of the Tanakama that says that. And that's how you ksuvim tarim choloshin matzil and isamim like the Rav Yossi brings down the Maisa where it's also that you can't, it's ton genizim. If you're saying that's a machlokes tanoim, who said why do you see from here machlokes tanoim? Maybe the machlokes in this Bryce is as follows: Mar Sover the Tanakam Rav Yossi holds in the likros ban. The reason he says you could save him from the fire because there's mutter to read from them. There's no issur. Umar Sover loy net the likros ban. And Rav Yossi says it's also. So where do you see that, according to the Man Domar, that it's a machlokes tanoim, that we have a Man Domar that says that it's also likros, even if it's also the likros, it's mutter to save them from the fire. El Rav Yossi v'tana the gift is. Elamai, it must be the machlokes tanoim is Rav Yossi, who says that it's also likros, and therefore they are tanoim over there, they Tanu and Geniza, or they're left in a Makam Turfa. And the Tana of the previous price that we learned the gift is that if it says clearly that if it was written in all of these languages, that in all these cases it was written in all these languages, that it's Matzila Noisa Ibnei Adleika, that it says in all of these languages, it says clearly Matzila Noisa Ibnei Hadleika. So therefore, Rav Huna says, the Tana, the gift, says that when it's also, even though it's also but I hold like the Rav Yossi, and it says if it's also, and then Ein Matzilin, you're not allowed to save it from the Dleika.